one of the big questions I wanted to ask was the difference between the AC Custom Series and the hand-wired series amps that we
Sure.
currently make.
Uh-huh.
You know, beyond just the features where, maybe there's only a certain feature like the hot switch on the hand wired version or things like that. But down to what makes hand wired process different from
Sure.
the PCB in a custom series.
Yeah, so I mean, it is an interesting question for sure, and a lot of it will be driven by feature set, and it will be designed to a target audience, and that target audience might be driven by price. So,
Right.
for example, the custom series has all the bells and whistles. You have a reverb, you have an effects loop, you know, multiple channels, tremolo, and some of those things are taken care of with solid state parts. It's still a tube signal path, but some of the little bits under the hood will be taken care of with op amps and with effects and things like that. For example, the tremolo is taken care of with a depletion mode FET, and it acts in a very similar way to a tube,
Right.
but that is the LFO. So if we were to do the LFO with a tube, the price would obviously be way higher. And then that might mean that the custom series isn't as accessible to someone who desperately wants to have an AC30 or an AC15, but can't
Right.
quite push the price up. So those things often drive, who wants to buy this product? Who's it for? What are the trade-offs? And what do we need in a high-end product? And what do we need in a mass market AC product? What modern features are required by modern day players versus a vintage purist, for example, who goes, effects loop, no way. I'm not having an effects loop. That's going to ruin my tone, for example. Or I don't want a reverb in it because the Beatles never used, their AC30s didn't have reverbs in. Why on earth am I going to have a reverb? Things like that.
Right.
So the key differences in that are the hand wires are designed for the purists. So the parts that are used inside a hand wired product are higher quality parts. And when I say higher quality, that could mean anything, but they actually have an effect on the tone. So for example, all of the resistors in the hand wires are carbon composite resistors, which not only are they 10 times the price of a standard metal film resistor, but they actually have a different frequency response and affect the tone. And it's a kind of, imagine it's like a teeny little bit of an effect, but if you add like 100 resistors, that is a little ripple effect, and it just adds that little bit, and then but the end product, the sum of their parts, if you like, it has a huge effect on the overall tone. And not only that, all of the parts in a hand wired part are mounted on turret boards. They're all individually hand wired. These are meticulously built. These are hand built. No machinery can do what goes into these hand wire products. Whereas a custom series, for example, that PCB, the printed circuit board that holds all the electronic components, all of those parts are mounted by auto insertion machines, which is just a machine that can just plow along and insert all of these parts. It then goes through a wave soldering machine, so they're not individually soldered parts, whereas the hand wired, every wire is hand soldered. Every single connection is tin copper wire between each of the turrets is hand soldered. Each component is meticulously bent and placed and soldered, and all of these little things, this purest of tone paths, can, again, it's the sum of their parts. They all add up to being this much purer VOX sound. And again, we're using like premium transformers. Generally, they will have higher grade tube set in them. And, it's just all those little bits just all add up to, a product that is for the purist. So another key difference between the hand wired and the custom series is the custom series has a solid state rectifier and the hand wireds have a valve rectifier. So in the AC30s is GZ34, in the AC15 hand wireds it's an EZ81, and they add a significant cost, but they also affect how the amp responds. So you get a lot more sag, which is where the voltage, as you're digging in and more current gets drawn, the voltage drops down and you get that kind of compressy kind of sound. With a solid state rectifier, which is just diodes, it's much more rigid and you don't get that natural sagging. So we have to add that in, if you know what I mean. So we have some circuitry where we can take care of simulating the sag, but the GZ34 kind of takes care of everything. And again, because it's for the purist, you want to kind of keep the whole tube set going, you know? So that's kind of like, that's really the key differences between them. It's construction, everything's meticulously hand wired versus a lot more automation goes into the custom series versus the tonality and the trade-offs and feature set. So again, it's purists, modern day player, features, I don't care about features. You know, it's, I want the pure tone, I want the modern day features, you know, I don't want to pay this much money, I want to pay, you know, it's always a bit of a trade-off. So so for us, it's always important to have, obviously, the hand wired, as you know, in the for our 60th anniversary, we did the reissues of the 1964 AC30 and AC15, obviously from 58. And you know, they were even more meticulously, you know, constructed than our current hand-wired lineup, and that's why we did them as the limited edition, especially for the 60th anniversary. You can't get hold of those things anymore, you know. They are just out there,
right?
And you know, we did a super limited number, and you know, UK made and UK transformers and everything, and again, you don't get closer to that vintage tone than you did with those amplifiers. That was as close as we could get. They were manufactured with the same components almost, you know, modern day versions, but you know, component values and quality. And yeah, they were really something, really something.
Yeah, those are. We have one at the office, and it's, you know,
yeah, me too.
Unbelievable.
It's mine. No,
so it sounds like, to me, who understands these things but isn't an engineer, that some of the, or most of the changes that are made in the custom series are outside of the audio path.
Yes, exactly.
And so you make that change and it may affect the feel of the amp or may slightly change the way that the tremolo, the LFO and the tremolo is behaving because it's working from a different component, but that's not directly affecting the audio path.
That's right.
So that's where the purist versus just wanting an AC30 comes in, because you know, the purist who wants the tube driven LFO for the tremolo, that you're only going to get hand wired. Is that right?
Well, obviously our current hand wired has no tremolo whatsoever. It's completely just normal and top boost. But the reissue we did have the fully functioning bib trem channel, which I think took up about 90% of the components inside the amp, because it was very, very complex circuit and has a really interesting tonality. And it was just because it was tremolo and vibrato, and the vibrato part of the circuit really took up like so much space, but was totally worth doing. I think the other thing to consider is, like, for the purists, you know, smoothing capacitance values are often a big bone of contention. So do you want a more modern sound that doesn't sag and therefore doesn't ghost? If you have like a low capacitance value like the originals had, they had like 22 microfarad caps in the power amp, 8 microfarad caps, which don't even exist anymore, 8 microfarad caps in the preamp. The power rails, instead of being fixed at like your 320 or so volts, they're bouncing up and down. Every time you dig into the amp, it's driving down, down, down. And what that could do, and generally did, especially with the low end, is it would cause these, we would call them strange, but they were part of the amp. They were part of its feel, but this ghosting. And it's these low end kind of subharmonics that would appear, but you're only getting that because of the capacitance. you know, and the smoothing's not high enough, or it's just a different value. You know, back in the 60s, it didn't matter because, hey, everyone's playing clean. Who needs distortion?
Right.
Well, then things change, and then people do want distortion, and those capacitance values are no longer enough. So with the more modern amps, for example, the custom series, the capacitance values are higher because we didn't want the ghosting. We wanted this to be for a more modern player. And
right.
unless you're in the know, because Vox is quirky, you know, it's always had a little bit of like, you know, just quirk and weirdness about it, which is good because weird is good. But we didn't feel that we needed to explain it. You know, if it just worked, then great. But, you know, so again, it was this trade-off, you know, just keeping it simple. It's for the modern player. If you want something a bit more quirky, you go for UK hand-wired, or if you want something that sits nicely in the middle, you know, then our current hand-wired lineup.
Right. So that's really interesting, how some of those quirks can kind of be less of an advantage for some players. Like I know a handful of our artists who play heavier music, punk or hard rock, only use the custom AC30s. And then some of the artists who play less into that distorted range will use the hand wired. And I always kind of wondered, what's the difference in feel there? Why, you know, clearly a choice was made. And when you have 4 AC30 customs stacked on top of each other, you're not talking about that choice being made for price. So what's the advantage? You know, why was the choice made? And I'm sure sometimes it's look, like preferring the different Tolux color, but that's interesting, that sort of the artifacts of distortion, the custom series can sound a little bit more modern in a way, not modern tone wise, but modern in how it responds to distortion.
Yeah.